Picture this. You're standing in a forest, watching sunlight filter through the canopy above. But these aren't the trees you know. These are ancient conifers and cycads, their leaves rustling in a warm breeze that carries scents you can't quite place. And then you hear it. Not a roar, not the thunderous bellow you've heard in movies, but something stranger, a deep, resonant boom that seems to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through your chest like the lowest note of an enormous wind instrument. In the shadows ahead, something moves, and as it steps into a patch of light, you realize with a start that it's covered not in scales, but in feathers. Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science meets serenity. Each night, we explore the quiet wonders of the natural world, calming your mind and sparking your curiosity. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and commenting below if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics of future episodes. For more than a century and a half, we've been trying to understand what dinosaurs were really like. Not the monsters of Hollywood, not the sluggish reptiles of Victorian imagination, but the actual living, breathing animals that walked this planet for over 160 million years. And with each fossil discovery, with each new technique for analyzing ancient bones, the picture has changed. The dinosaurs that emerge from modern science are stranger, more complex, and infinitely more fascinating than anything we could have imagined. They were animals that blurred the lines between the categories we thought we understood. Some had metabolisms that burned as hot as any modern bird. Others moved with a grace that defies our attempts to recreate it. They sang to each other across ancient landscapes. They cared for their young with tenderness that would look familiar to any parent today. They were neither the cold-blooded monsters nor the mammal-like creatures of various theories, but something uniquely their own. Tonight, we're going to walk through what scientists have learned about how dinosaurs truly lived. Not speculation, not guesswork, but discoveries written in stone and preserved in amber, analyzed with technologies that would have seemed like magic to the first paleontologists. We'll explore how they moved, how they sounded, how they thought, and how they raised their families. We'll discover animals that were simultaneously alien and strangely familiar, creatures that challenge everything we thought we knew about the ancient past. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let's step back in time to see dinosaurs not as we imagined them, but as they really were. The first thing you need to forget is scales. For decades, that's how we pictured them. Scaly skin, like enormous lizards, their hides tough and reptilian under the Mesozoic sun. But then, in the mid-1990s, paleontologists working in China began uncovering something remarkable. Fossils so exquisitely preserved that they showed not just bones, but the soft tissues that had once surrounded them. And many of those tissues were feathers. The discovery of Sinosauropteryx in 1996 changed everything. Here was a dinosaur, a small theropod from the early Cretaceous, about 126 million years ago, whose body was covered in a thick coat of filaments. Not quite like modern bird feathers, these were simpler structures, more like dark, fuzzy down, but they were unmistakably feather-like, made of keratin and other proteins, some of them even branching. This wasn't an isolated case. Since then, dozens of feathered dinosaur species have been discovered, and the evidence keeps mounting. In 2011, amber samples from 75 to 80 million years ago were found to contain actual preserved feathers from both dinosaurs and birds. The preservation was so perfect that scientists could analyze the chemical composition, confirming that early feathers contained beta proteins similar to those in modern bird feathers. But here's what makes this even more extraordinary. Feathers weren't just found in the small, bird-like dinosaurs you might expect. They were found in species across the dinosaur family tree. Utaranus, a relative of Tyrannosaurus rex, measured 23 feet long and weighed over a ton, and it was covered in shaggy, insulating feathers. Fossil evidence shows patches of fuzzy protofeathers across its body, similar to the plumage of an emu. This discovery suggested something profound. If Utarannosaurus had feathers, and it was closely related to T. rex, then the most fearsome predator we know might have been feathered too. Not the scaly monster of Jurassic Park, but something stranger and more wonderful, a giant predator that might have looked like a terrifying 17,000-pound chicken. Even more remarkable is where feathers have been found. Not just in theropods, the two-legged meat-eaters that gave rise to birds, but in ornithischians, the bird-hipped dinosaurs only distantly related to the bird lineage. This suggests that feathers, or at least feather-like structures, might have been present in the very earliest dinosaurs, inherited from a common ancestor that lived over 230 million years ago. The discovery of feathered ornithischians implies that we may need to reimagine vast swaths of the dinosaur family tree, picturing creatures we've always thought of as scaly, wearing coats of fluff or plumage. The evolution of feathers themselves tells a remarkable story. They didn't spring into existence fully formed. Instead, they evolved through a series of stages, each serving different purposes, before eventually enabling flight. The earliest feather-like structures were simple hollow filaments, basically modified scales made of keratin. These would have provided some insulation, helping small dinosaurs maintain their body temperature. From there, evolution produced branching filaments, where a central shaft had multiple branches extending outward, creating a fuzzy, down-like covering. This is the stage we see in Sinosauropteryx and many other early feathered dinosaurs. The next step was the development of what scientists call pennaceous feathers, where the branches themselves developed smaller branches called barbules, with tiny hooks that could zip together, creating a flat surface. These feathers had a central shaft called a rachis, with the interlocking branches forming veins on either side. This structure is remarkably similar to modern bird feathers, and it appeared in dinosaurs long before anything could fly. Why would a ground-dwelling dinosaur need pennaceous feathers? Display is the most likely answer. These feathers could be brightly coloured, arranged in eye-catching patterns, used in courtship rituals and territorial displays. Finally, some lineages developed asymmetrical flight feathers, where one vein is narrower than the other, a structure that provides the aerodynamic properties necessary for flight. These appeared in the Maniraptorans, the group of theropods most closely related to birds, and they mark the beginning of true powered flight in dinosaur evolution. But even after flight evolved, many dinosaur lineages retained their feathers for other purposes. Flightless species kept their plumage for warmth, for display, for protecting eggs in nests. The diversity of feather types and functions across the dinosaur family tree is a testament to evolution's ability to repurpose structures for new uses. What's particularly fascinating is that we can trace feather evolution, not just through fossil morphology, but through chemistry. When scientists analyze fossilized feathers using electron microscopes, they can identify traces of the original protein structures. The beta-keratins that make up modern bird feathers have a specific molecular signature, and that same signature appears in dinosaur feathers from 160 million years ago. This confirms that the molecular machinery for making feathers was already in place early in dinosaur evolution, inherited from ancestors, and then modified over time to produce the incredible diversity of forms we see in the fossil record. And these weren't just plain feathers. Fossil evidence reveals that many dinosaurs sported colours we can actually determine from the fossilized remains. The secret lies in tiny structures called melanosomes, pigment-containing organelles preserved within fossilized feathers. By analysing the shape and distribution of these melanosomes, scientists can reconstruct the colours that decorated dinosaur bodies millions of years ago. Microraptor, a small four-winged dinosaur from China, had glossy black feathers with an iridescent sheen, much like a modern crow or raven. Sinosauropteryx, that first feathered dinosaur discovery, had a rusty red and white striped tail. Anchiornis, a crow-sized dinosaur from 160 million years ago, displayed a spectacular colour pattern. Its body was covered in black and white feathers, with a reddish crown on its head, and long wing feathers striped in black and white. It would have been unmistakable in its forest habitat. The purposes of these feathers varied as widely as their forms. The simplest feather-like structures were probably for insulation, helping smaller dinosaurs maintain their body temperature in cooler climates. But as feathers became more complex, they took on additional roles. Display was almost certainly one of them. Just as modern birds use colourful plumage to attract mates and intimidate rivals, dinosaurs likely did the same. The elaborate tail fans of some oviraptorosaurs, marked with bold patterns and bright colours, seem to have had no purpose other than showing off. Some males probably performed elaborate courtship displays, fanning their feathered tails or wings in ritualized dances, just as peacocks and birds of paradise do today. There's even trace fossil evidence of this behaviour. Paleontologists have found scratched surfaces in ancient sediments, marks that match the shape and pattern of modern bird scrape ceremonies, where males create shallow depressions in the ground to attract females. Not all feathered dinosaurs could fly, of course. Most couldn't, but the feathers served them anyway, keeping them warm during cold nights, helping them blend into their surroundings, making them more impressive to potential mates. And in some lineages, those feathers gradually evolved the characteristics needed for flight. The asymmetrical, interlocking structure of flight feathers appeared gradually over millions of years. Early attempts at flight might have been more like gliding, or what scientists call wing-assisted incline running, using partial wings to help climb steep slopes or leap after prey. Eventually, true powered flight emerged, and a lineage of feathered dinosaurs took to the air permanently. Those are the dinosaurs we now call birds, the only dinosaur lineage that survived the mass extinction 66 million years ago. But even for the earthbound dinosaurs, feathers changed our understanding of what these animals looked like. Picture a velociraptor, not the scaly predator of the movies, but a creature covered in feathers from head to tail, with long feathers on its arms and a fan of feathers at the end of its tail. The quill knobs on its arm bones tell us this unequivocally. These were real animals that breathed and hunted and raised their young, and many of them looked more like bizarre birds than like any reptile we know today. When you imagine a dinosaur now, you have to imagine something stranger and more vibrant than anything Hollywood has shown us. You have to picture animals that moved through ancient forests in coats of down and plumage, their feathers catching the light, their colors as bright and varied as any bird you might see today. If we're going to understand what dinosaurs were really like, we need to hear them too, and here's where our evidence becomes more fragmentary, more dependent on inference and comparison with living animals. Sound doesn't fossilize. The calls that echoed across Cretaceous plains, the songs that filled Jurassic forests, they're gone, lost to the passage of time. But paleontologists have found ways to reconstruct at least some of the soundscape of the dinosaur world, using the structures preserved in fossils and comparing them to the vocalizations of dinosaurs' living relatives. The key insight comes from studying birds and crocodilians, the two groups of archosaurs that survived to the present day. Both use a vocalization method called closed-mouth vocalization, where sounds are produced with the beak or mouth closed, air pushed into specialized pouches in the throat and neck. The resulting sounds are low, resonant booms or hoots, quite different from the open-mouthed screams and roars of most mammals. Doves produce their characteristic cooing this way. Ostriches make deep, booming sounds that can carry for kilometers. And crocodilians use closed-mouth vocalizations extensively, especially during mating season, when males produce infrasonic rumbles that make the water around them dance and ripple. Studies published in the journal Evolution in 2016 showed that closed-mouth vocalizations evolved at least 16 times independently in the archosaur lineage. This means the common ancestor of dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and crocodilians almost certainly used this method of sound production. And if dinosaurs were archosaurs living between birds and crocodilians on the family tree, they probably used closed-mouth vocalizations too. Instead of roaring with open mouths like lions, they likely produced sounds more like the booming of ostriches or the bellows of alligators. Deep, resonant, strange to our ears, but perfectly suited to the animals that made them. But some dinosaurs went even further. The duck-billed dinosaurs, called hadrosaurs, possessed some of the most remarkable sound-producing structures ever discovered. These animals sported elaborate crests on their heads, hollow, bony structures that varied wildly in shape between species. Parasaurolophus had a long, curved tube extending backward from its skull, sometimes reaching 6 feet in length. Corythosaurus had a rounded, helmet-like crest. Lambeosaurus had a hatchet-shaped crest that projected forward over its nose. For decades, paleontologists puzzled over these structures. Were they snorkels for breathing underwater, heat radiators for cooling the brain, enhanced smell organs? But when scientists used CT scanning technology to look inside the crests, they discovered something extraordinary. The crests were hollow, containing complex systems of tubes that connected the nostrils to the throat. In the late 1990s, paleontologist Tom Williamson and computer scientist Carl Diegert took CT scan data from a Parasaurolophus skull and used it to create a 3-dimensional computer model of the internal air passages. By analyzing the size and shape of these passages, they could calculate the natural frequencies at which air would resonate inside them, just like determining the pitch of a musical instrument from its dimensions. The results were startling. the Parasaurolophus crest worked like a gigantic woodwind instrument, specifically like a crumhorn, a bent horn instrument used in medieval music. When the dinosaur breathed through its crest, the air would resonate at specific frequencies, producing low, trombone-like notes that could change in pitch depending on how the animal controlled its breathing. The reconstruction created from this data is eerie and beautiful. The sound is deep and resonant, with a quality that's simultaneously alien and strangely musical. It doesn't sound like anything alive today, really. Something between a foghorn and the lowest notes of a bassoon, with harmonics that make it seem to come from everywhere at once. And this was probably just one of many sounds the animal could make, varying the pitch and volume, perhaps even producing something like songs. The fossil record suggests these animals lived in herds, and such elaborate vocalization systems would have been perfect for staying in contact across distances, identifying individuals, attracting mates, and coordinating group movements. But what about the predators? The theropods, the two-legged meat-eaters that ranged from chicken-sized to the massive Tyrannosaurus. Current evidence suggests they, too, used closed-mouth vocalizations, despite what Jurassic Park would have us believe. That iconic T-Rex roar, mouth wide open, tongue visible, makes for great cinema but poor paleontology. More likely, a Tyrannosaurus would have produced sounds with its mouth closed, deep percussive booms generated by inflating air sacs in its throat and chest. These sounds could still have been extremely loud, carrying across long distances to claim territory or challenge rivals. But they would have been fundamentally different from mammalian roars, more like the sounds crocodilians make, only scaled up to match an animal that weighed 7 tons. Very recently, in December 2024, paleontologists announced an extraordinary discovery. A fossil of Pulaosaurus, a small herbivorous dinosaur from 163 million years ago, was found with its voice box preserved. The larynx, the structure involved in sound production, was ossified, turned to bone in a way that's incredibly rare. This preservation showed that at least some dinosaurs had large, bony larynxes that might have been capable of more complex vocalizations than previously thought. James Napoli, a vertebrate paleontologist, noted that while we'd suspected large larynxes existed, this was the first concrete evidence, opening possibilities that some dinosaurs might have had greater vocal abilities than scientists had imagined. Beyond vocalization, dinosaurs likely used other forms of acoustic communication. Some species may have produced sounds by striking body parts together, similar to how modern monitor lizards slap their tails on the ground, or how gorillas beat their chests. The elaborate plates and spikes of stegosaurs, the frills of ceratopsians, the crests of hadrosaurs, all of these structures could have been used to produce sounds through physical contact. A stegosaurus rattling its tail spikes together might have created a warning signal. A triceratops striking its frill with its horns could have produced intimidating sounds during territorial disputes. Footfalls themselves would have been a form of communication. A large sauropod walking through a forest would have produced ground-shaking vibrations that could be felt long before the animal was visible. These seismic signals, transmitted through the earth, might have carried information about the size, speed, and direction of movement. Modern elephants use infrasonic calls that travel through the ground as well as the air, allowing them to communicate across distances of several miles. Large dinosaurs might have done something similar, their footsteps and vocalizations combining to create a complex acoustic environment. The acoustic ecology of dinosaur environments would have been fundamentally different from anything we experience today. The largest land animals currently living, elephants and giraffes, can produce powerful infrasonic calls, but they're nothing compared to what a 40-ton sauropod might have managed. The resonant chambers of hadrosaur crests could have filled valleys with their calls. The boom of a tyrannosaur claiming territory might have been audible for miles. And underneath it all, the constant background of smaller dinosaurs calling, moving, interacting, creating a soundscape we can barely imagine. The ancient world was full of sound then, the booming of hadrosaurs echoing across floodplains, the deep rumbles of tyrannosaurs claiming territory, the calls of smaller theropods communicating within their groups, the percussive sounds of threat displays and courtship rituals, the seismic vibrations of giant sauropods walking. It wasn't silent, this lost world. It sang and boomed and called and rumbled, a soundscape we're only beginning to reconstruct, one fossil at a time. Close your eyes and imagine it. A Cretaceous dawn, with the air full of strange, resonant calls, sounds unlike anything you've heard before. The voices of animals that no longer exist, speaking to each other across millions of years. One of the most remarkable transformations in our understanding of dinosaurs has been the discovery of how they raised their young. The old image of dinosaurs as cold, reptilian creatures that laid their eggs and abandoned them has given way to evidence of parental care, of nesting colonies, of animals that invested enormous energy in protecting and feeding their offspring. This evidence comes from multiple sources, spectacular fossil finds that capture moments of family life frozen in stone, preserved for us to discover millions of years later. The story begins in Montana in the late 1970s. Paleontologists Jack Horner and Bob Mackellar were working in an area now known as Egg Mountain when they made a discovery that would revolutionize dinosaur paleobiology. They found fossilized nests, the first dinosaur nests discovered in the Western Hemisphere, and they weren't isolated. Multiple nests were clustered together in what appeared to be a nesting colony, suggesting that these dinosaurs returned to the same location year after year to lay their eggs. The nests belonged to a duck-billed dinosaur that Horner named Maiasaura, meaning good mother lizard. And the name was chosen carefully because the evidence suggested these were indeed caring parents. The nests themselves were carefully constructed, bowl-shaped depressions in the earth, lined with vegetation. Each contained around a dozen eggs, arranged in a circular pattern. But what made the discovery extraordinary was the presence of juvenile bones found in and around the nests. These weren't newly hatched babies. They were young dinosaurs that had already grown to 2 or 3 feet long, but they were still in the nesting area. The joint surfaces in their legs were poorly developed, meaning they couldn't have walked well yet. But their teeth showed signs of wear, indicating they'd been feeding. The only explanation was that the parents had been bringing food back to the nest, caring for their young until they were large enough and strong enough to leave. Horner's discovery suggested that at least some dinosaurs had what scientists call altricial young, babies that were helpless after hatching and required extensive parental care, like most songbirds today. This was a revelation. For decades, dinosaurs had been compared to modern reptiles, which generally have precocial young that can fend for themselves almost immediately after hatching. But here was evidence that some dinosaurs had evolved a fundamentally different reproductive strategy, one that demanded long-term parental investment. Even more dramatic evidence came from Mongolia. Oviraptorids, a family of bird-like theropod dinosaurs, were initially given an unfortunate name. When the first specimen was discovered in the 1920s, it was found near a nest of eggs assumed to belong to the small ceratopsian Protoceratops. The name Oviraptor means egg thief, implying these dinosaurs stole and ate eggs. But later discoveries completely changed that interpretation. In the 1990s, paleontologists found fossils of Oviraptorids actually sitting on nests of eggs. Not near them, on them, in a posture identical to that of modern brooding birds. One famous specimen, nicknamed Big Mama, shows a Sitipati osmolskai preserved directly on top of a nest, its arms spread over the eggs, its body positioned in the center of the nest in a way that would have kept the eggs warm and protected. These discoveries, combined with study of the eggs themselves, revealed remarkable details about oviraptorid reproduction. The animals laid their eggs 2 at a time over a period of 2 weeks to a month, carefully arranging each pair in a circle around the nest's perimeter. The eggs would have taken months to hatch. Throughout this period, at least one parent remained with the nest, protecting it from predators and possibly keeping it warm with body heat and feather-covered arms. For an animal that weighed hundreds of pounds, this represented an enormous investment of time and energy. Its parental care as devoted as anything seen in modern birds. And it demonstrates that at least some dinosaurs formed strong bonds with their offspring. Recent research published in 2024 has taken this even further. By examining the bone structure of embryonic and hatchling dinosaurs and comparing them to modern birds with known parenting behaviors, scientists can now make inferences about whether species provided food to their young. Studies of Lufengosaurus, an early Jurassic sauropodomorph, showed that the hatchlings had bone structures indicating they couldn't forage for themselves and must have been fed by parents. This extends evidence of parental feeding back even further in dinosaur history, to over 190 million years ago. But not all dinosaurs showed the same level of parental care. The enormous sauropods, the long-necked giants that included the largest animals ever to walk on land, seem to have used a different strategy. Their nests have been found in colonial arrangements, suggesting they returned to specific nesting grounds. But there's little evidence of post-hatching care. The eggs were often buried in vegetation or sand, left to incubate using heat from decomposition or the sun. This makes sense when you consider the size difference between a newly hatched sauropod, which might weigh only a few pounds, and an adult that could weigh 50 tons or more. Direct parental care would have been logistically difficult and potentially dangerous. The babies were probably precocial, able to move and feed themselves soon after hatching, joining together in groups for protection, while the adults foraged nearby. In Alaska, near the Arctic Circle, paleontologists have found fossils of hadrosaur hatchlings that died in what was once the far north. These animals lived at latitudes where winter would have brought months of darkness and cold. The presence of very young juveniles, combined with evidence that hadrosaurs provided parental care, paints a picture of these dinosaurs tending their young through harsh Arctic winters, helping them find food in the darkness, protecting them through conditions that no modern reptile could survive. It's an image of dedication and endurance, of animals that went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the survival of the next generation. The diversity of dinosaur eggs themselves tells us about the evolution of parenting strategies. For most of dinosaur history, it was assumed that all dinosaurs laid hard-shelled eggs like modern birds and crocodilians. But recent discoveries have shown this isn't true. Some dinosaurs, particularly certain protoceratopsians like Protoceratops, laid soft-shelled eggs more like those of modern turtles or snakes. These soft shells are more fragile, more sensitive to environmental conditions, and they can't support the weight of an adult sitting on them. This tells us immediately that these species couldn't brood their eggs the way birds do. The parents couldn't sit on the nest. Instead, they probably buried the eggs in vegetation or sand, relying on environmental heat for incubation. The discovery of soft-shelled dinosaur eggs was surprising because it revealed that eggshell type evolved multiple times in dinosaurs. Hard shells appeared independently in different lineages, suggesting that the evolution of parenting behavior drove changes in egg structure, or perhaps vice versa. Species that brooded their eggs benefited from hard shells that could withstand the parent's weight. Species that buried their eggs didn't need that structural strength and could invest resources elsewhere. Egg shape varied too. Some dinosaurs laid spherical eggs, others elongated or even cone-shaped eggs. The shape correlates with nesting style. Spherical eggs can be arranged in neat clusters and are less likely to roll away. Elongated eggs can be positioned upright, making more efficient use of limited nest space. Cone-shaped eggs can be arranged in spirals, with the pointed ends facing inward, creating stable structures that protect eggs in exposed locations. Each shape represents an adaptation to specific environmental challenges and parenting strategies. The porosity of eggshells, the number and size of pores that allow gas exchange, varied depending on nesting conditions. Eggs buried deep in vegetation, where oxygen might be limited and humidity high, needed different porosity than eggs in open nests exposed to air and sun. By studying eggshell microstructure under microscopes, paleontologists can infer not just which species laid which eggs, but where and how those eggs were incubated, revealing intimate details of dinosaur reproduction that wouldn't be visible from the bones alone. Dinosaur parenting, then, was as varied as the dinosaurs themselves. Some species invested heavily in their young, feeding them for months, protecting them, teaching them. Others laid their eggs and left, trusting in numbers and instinct to ensure some offspring would survive. But across the spectrum, we see behaviors that are anything but reptilian, anything but cold and uncaring. We see animals that were, in many ways, behaving like birds, because birds are dinosaurs. And this is what dinosaurs did. When you watch a bird building a nest, sitting on eggs, feeding chicks, you're watching dinosaur behavior, patterns that evolved over 100 million years ago and persist today. The devoted parents of the Mesozoic weren't so different from the devoted parents you might see in your backyard. Proof that some of the most fundamental aspects of life, the drive to nurture and protect one's young, have remained constant across unimaginable spans of time. To understand dinosaurs as living animals, we need to watch them move, not just walking, but running, turning, leaping, using their bodies with precision and grace. And here, modern science has given us tools that seem almost magical in their ability to resurrect movement from stone. By combining fossil evidence with computational biomechanics, researchers can create simulations of dinosaur locomotion that reveal how these animals actually moved through their world. The first thing to understand is that many dinosaurs were bipeds, walking on 2 legs rather than 4. This was the ancestral condition for dinosaurs, present in the very earliest species and retained throughout the Mesozoic in most major groups. But bipedalism in dinosaurs was fundamentally different from human bipedalism. Humans walk upright, with our weight directly over our hips, our spines vertical. Dinosaurs walked with their bodies horizontal, their long tails counterbalancing the weight of their torsos and heads. This posture required different mechanics, different muscle arrangements, different ways of maintaining balance. For decades, scientists tried to understand these mechanics using static analyses, treating the dinosaur body as a rigid structure balanced at the hips. But in 2021, researchers at the Royal Veterinary College in London created the first fully predictive, 3-dimensional, muscle-driven simulation of dinosaur locomotion. They modelled Curlophysis, a small theropod from the Triassic period, about 6 feet long and built for speed. The simulation incorporated not just the skeleton, but muscles, tendons, and the coordination of movements throughout the entire body. And what it revealed was completely unexpected. The tail didn't just act as a static counterbalance, a dead weight holding the front of the body up. Instead, it moved actively, flexing from side to side as the animal walked and ran. These lateral movements weren't driven by muscles pulling the tail back and forth. They were passive, physics-based movements, the tail swinging naturally in response to the forces generated by the legs and body. But these movements served a crucial purpose. They regulated the animal's angular momentum, preventing it from rotating or tipping over, in exactly the same way that human arms swing when we walk or run. When we walk, our arms swing opposite to our legs, the left arm moving forward as the right leg moves forward. This isn't conscious. It's automatic, driven by the physics of balance. And dinosaur tails did the same thing, swinging to maintain stability, making bipedal locomotion more efficient and less energetically expensive. This discovery changes how we should imagine dinosaurs moving. Picture a theropod running, and now add that sinuous movement of the tail, flexing rhythmically from side to side with each stride. It would have been beautiful to watch, graceful in a way that's hard to convey in still images. The tail wasn't just a static appendage. It was an active part of the locomotor system, as important to balance as the legs themselves. And this applied not just to Curlophysis, but potentially to all the bipedal dinosaurs, from the smallest compsognathids to Tyrannosaurus itself, all moving with this characteristic side-to-side tail movement that we've only just discovered. Speed is another question that has captivated paleontologists. How fast could dinosaurs run? For predators and prey alike, speed could mean the difference between a successful hunt or a desperate escape. Various methods have been tried over the decades. Anatomical comparisons, looking at leg length and muscle attachment points. Trackway analysis, measuring the distance between footprints to calculate stride length. Biomechanical models that simulate muscle function and bone stress. The results vary, but some patterns have emerged. Smaller theropods were probably quite fast. Species like Velociraptor and Deinonychus, with their long legs and light build, might have been capable of speeds up to 25 or 30 miles per hour in short bursts. Larger theropods were more constrained. Tyrannosaurus, despite its fearsome reputation, was probably not particularly fast by modern standards. Biomechanical analyses suggest a top speed of perhaps 15 to 20 miles per hour, fast enough to run down many prey animals, but not approaching the speeds of modern cursorial predators like cheetahs. The sheer mass of the animal, 7 tons of bone and muscle, would have made higher speeds physically impossible. The bones and joints couldn't have withstood the stress, but speed alone doesn't tell the whole story. Recent research comparing dinosaur locomotion to modern birds has revealed something fascinating about how dinosaurs moved through the transition from walking to running. Humans have distinct gaits. We walk at slow speeds and run at fast speeds, with an abrupt transition between the two. The change is obvious and instantaneous, but birds don't move this way. As birds speed up, they gradually adjust their stride length, step frequency, and step width in a continuous repertoire of movement. There's no sudden transition from walking to running. They flow seamlessly from one to the other. Analysis of theropod trackways, particularly a remarkable set from Culpeper, Virginia, shows that non-avian dinosaurs moved the same way. As their speed increased, the spacing between their left and right feet gradually decreased, the footprints moving closer to the body's midline. At the fastest speeds, the tracks could even cross over the midline. This gradual change, rather than the abrupt shift seen in humans, suggests dinosaurs used a continuous locomotor repertoire like modern birds. The advantages of this are several. It allows for fine-tuned control of speed and stability. It reduces stress on bones and joints by avoiding sudden changes in gait. And it may have improved head stability, keeping vision steady even while moving at speed, important for both predators tracking prey and prey watching for danger. The sauropods, those enormous long-necked giants, present their own locomotor puzzles. How did an animal weighing 50 tons move at all? The answer lies partly in their unusual skeletal structure. Their vertebrae were hollowed out by air sacs connected to the respiratory system, reducing weight without sacrificing strength. Their limbs were columnar, like elephant legs, but scaled up dramatically, with the bones arranged to transfer weight directly down to the ground. And they moved with a distinctive gait called a diagonal couplet, where the front and hind leg on opposite sides of the body moved together. Trackways show this clearly, with the diagonal pairs of footprints falling in a regular pattern. Despite their size, sauropods were probably capable of covering ground efficiently. Not fast, certainly, but steady and relentless. Some trackways show evidence of tight turns, suggesting more maneuverability than you might expect from such massive animals. And there's evidence from multiple sites of sauropods traveling in groups, with smaller juveniles staying in the center of the herd, protected by the adults on the outside. These were coordinated movements, animals working together to protect the vulnerable, a level of social organization that requires not just physical ability, but cognitive sophistication. The biomechanics of sauropod locomotion present fascinating engineering challenges. Each footfall of a 40-ton animal generates enormous forces that had to be absorbed and distributed through bones, joints, and soft tissues. The foot itself was remarkably specialized, with a thick pad of cartilage acting as a shock absorber, similar to the foot pads of elephants, but on a much larger scale. The limb bones were massively thick, but they weren't solid. Inside, they had a honeycomb structure, strong in the directions where force was applied, but lighter than solid bone would have been. This combination of structural optimization and biological material science allowed animals to exist at sizes that would be physically impossible with different designs. Speed estimates for various dinosaurs have improved as computational methods have become more sophisticated. Modern biomechanical simulations can model not just bones, but muscles, tendons, ligaments, even the nervous system controlling everything. These simulations reveal that speed was often limited not by bone strength but by muscle power. A running animal has to produce enough force with each stride, not just to support its weight but to accelerate it forward. For very large animals, this becomes the limiting factor. The muscles simply can't generate enough force fast enough to achieve high speeds, regardless of how strong the bones are. For smaller dinosaurs, different constraints applied. Very small theropods, perhaps the size of a chicken, would have been limited by the physical properties of muscle tissue itself. There's a maximum rate at which muscles can contract, and at small sizes, this becomes the limiting factor for speed. This is why the smallest dinosaurs probably weren't particularly fast despite their light weight. Medium-sized dinosaurs, those roughly the size of a large dog to a human, probably had the best combination of muscle power and body mass for achieving high speeds. This is where you'd find the truly fast species, the pursuit predators, and the prey animals that needed to outrun them. When you imagine a dinosaur moving now, you have to think beyond the shuffling monsters of old movies. You have to picture animals that moved with precision and grace, their tails swinging rhythmically, their heads stable and eyes alert, their bodies coordinated in movements that were simultaneously alien and familiar. They were neither clumsy nor awkward. They were animals perfectly adapted to their world, moving through it with the confidence that comes from 100 million years of evolutionary refinement. Perhaps no question about dinosaurs has been more contentious than their metabolism. Were they warm-blooded, like birds and mammals, maintaining a constant internal temperature through metabolic heat generation? Or were they cold-blooded, like modern reptiles, depending on the environment to regulate their body temperature? The answer, as with so many things about dinosaurs, turns out to be more complex than a simple binary choice. The debate goes back to the 1800s. When dinosaurs were first discovered, they were imagined as giant reptiles, sluggish and slow, basking in the sun to warm their cold blood before they could become active. But in the late 19th century, some scientists, including the famous anatomist Richard Owen, suggested that dinosaurs might have been more active, more energetic, possibly even warm-blooded. The idea fell out of favor for decades, until the 1960s and 70s, when paleontologist Robert Bakker began arguing strenuously for warm-blooded dinosaurs. Bakker's arguments were based on multiple lines of evidence. Dinosaurs had upright postures, with their legs directly beneath their bodies, unlike the sprawling limb posture of most reptiles. This suggested they were capable of sustained activity. Their bones showed rapid growth rates when analyzed microscopically, growth rates more similar to mammals than to reptiles. And the predator-prey ratios in dinosaur ecosystems matched those of mammalian ecosystems, suggesting dinosaurs had the high energy demands of warm-blooded animals. The debate that followed was fierce and productive, sparking new methods for studying ancient physiology. Scientists began examining bone histology more carefully, looking at the microscopic structure of fossilized bones for clues about metabolism. They measured dinosaur brain size relative to body mass, calculating something called the encephalization quotient to infer metabolic demands. They studied the structure of the cardiovascular system as revealed by fossil evidence, looking for signs of the 4-chambered hearts that would be needed to sustain high blood pressure and deliver oxygen efficiently to active tissues. All of this evidence pointed in the same direction. Dinosaurs were not like modern reptiles. They had higher metabolic rates, faster growth, more active lifestyles. But were they truly warm-blooded in the sense that birds and mammals are? Here, the picture gets more nuanced. In 2022, a groundbreaking study published in the journal Nature analyzed chemical signatures preserved in dinosaur bones, specifically looking at compounds called advanced lipoxidation end products. These molecules are produced during metabolism, and their concentration in bones correlates with metabolic rate in modern animals. By measuring these compounds in dinosaurs and comparing them to living animals, researchers could estimate dinosaur metabolic rates directly. The results were striking. Dinosaurs split into 2 major groups early in their evolution: the Saurischians, or lizard-hipped dinosaurs, and the Ornithischians, or bird-hipped dinosaurs. The Saurischian lineage, which included all the theropods, like Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor, as well as the giant sauropods, had metabolic rates comparable to warm-blooded animals. In fact, some theropods showed metabolic rates as high as modern birds, possibly even higher than mammals. These were truly endothermic animals, generating their own body heat through a fast-burning metabolism. The Ornithischian lineage, which included animals like Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and the duck-billed hadrosaurs, showed lower metabolic rates more similar to modern reptiles. These dinosaurs were probably ectothermic or cold-blooded, relying on environmental heat to maintain their body temperature. This means that warm-bloodedness evolved at least twice in the dinosaur lineage, and possibly more times. The theropods were hot-blooded, and their descendants, the birds, inherited this trait. The sauropods were also endothermic, despite their enormous size. But the Ornithischians, which branched off earlier, apparently lost the warm-blooded metabolism of their ancestors and returned to a more reptilian physiology. Why this happened is still unclear. Some scientists suggest it might have been related to their plant-eating lifestyle. Herbivores don't need the constant high activity levels of predators, and a lower metabolic rate means lower food requirements, which could be advantageous. There's also the question of gigantothermy, or inertial homeothermy. Very large animals, simply by virtue of their size, have difficulty losing heat. Their volume increases faster than their surface area, so they produce more heat than they can radiate away. This means that even without a high metabolic rate, very large dinosaurs like the sauropods might have maintained relatively constant body temperatures just through their bulk. They would have been functionally warm-blooded, not because they generated heat like mammals, but because they were so large they couldn't lose it fast enough to cool down. The evidence for dinosaur metabolism comes from multiple independent sources, and when these different lines of evidence agree, we can be more confident in our conclusions. Bone histology, the microscopic structure of fossil bones, reveals growth rates. Fast-growing animals have a characteristic bone structure with lots of blood vessels and what are called Haversian canals, channels where blood vessels run through the bone. Dinosaur bones show these features, indicating rapid growth more similar to birds and mammals than to reptiles. However, many dinosaur bones also show lines of arrested growth, periodic pauses in bone formation that suggest seasonal changes in metabolic rate. This is more typical of ectotherms, creating a complex picture where dinosaurs grew rapidly but not continuously. Blood pressure calculations provide another line of evidence. In any animal, the heart must generate enough pressure to pump blood to the highest point of the body, whether that's the top of the head, or, in sauropods, the head at the end of a neck that might be raised 15 or 20 feet above the heart. By measuring the vertical distance from heart to head and accounting for the density of blood, scientists can calculate the minimum blood pressure required. For large theropods, and especially for sauropods, these calculations suggest blood pressures much higher than those found in modern reptiles, approaching or exceeding mammalian blood pressures. This implies a cardiovascular system capable of supporting high activity levels and metabolic rates. Predator-prey ratios offer yet another approach. In modern ecosystems, the ratio of predator biomass to prey biomass depends on metabolic rate. Warm-blooded predators need more food to fuel their high metabolism, so predator populations are relatively small compared to prey populations. Cold-blooded predators need less food and can exist at higher population densities relative to their prey. By analyzing dinosaur fossil assemblages and calculating predator-prey ratios, some researchers have argued that the ratios match warm-blooded rather than cold-blooded ecosystems. However, this method is controversial because fossil assemblages may not accurately represent living populations, and factors like preservation bias can skew the results. Geographic distribution provides additional clues. Dinosaurs lived at all latitudes, from tropical regions near the equator to high latitudes well within the Arctic and Antarctic circles. Modern ectotherms are restricted to warm regions because they can't generate their own heat. The presence of dinosaurs in polar regions, even accounting for warmer Mesozoic climates, suggests at least some species had metabolic adaptations, allowing them to remain active in cool temperatures. This doesn't necessarily mean full endothermy, but it does indicate these animals weren't typical cold-blooded reptiles. The picture that emerges then is one of diversity. Some dinosaurs were genuinely warm-blooded, burning energy at rates comparable to modern endotherms. Others were cold-blooded, more reptilian in their physiology. And still, others might have been somewhere in between what scientists call mesotherms, with metabolic rates intermediate between ectotherms and endotherms. This middle ground might have offered advantages, allowing animals to be more active than typical reptiles without paying the full energy costs of endothermy. It might have let them grow larger than any fully endothermic animal could sustain. What this means for understanding dinosaurs is profound. The warm-blooded species would have been capable of sustained activity, hunting at night, remaining active in cool weather, living in regions too cold for typical reptiles. They would have needed to eat frequently to fuel their metabolisms, which helps explain the elaborate hunting strategies and social behaviors seen in some theropods. The cold-blooded species would have been more energy efficient, able to survive on less food, but more constrained by environmental temperature. They would have needed to bask in the sun to warm up, seek shade to cool down, time their activities to match the daily temperature cycle. Understanding dinosaur metabolism helps us see them as the complex, varied animals they were. Not a single type of creature, but a radiation of species with different physiological strategies, each adapted to their own ecological niche. Some burned hot and fast. Others moved more slowly through their world, conserving energy, patient and persistent. And together, they dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 100 million years. Proof that there's more than one way to build a successful animal. The question of dinosaur intelligence has always been loaded with assumption and speculation. The old stereotype held that dinosaurs had tiny brains relative to their body size, and were therefore stupid, dim-witted creatures that barely qualified as animals at all. Stegosaurus, with its walnut-sized brain in a body weighing several tons, became the poster child for this view. But, as with so many aspects of dinosaur paleontology, the reality is far more interesting than the stereotype. The traditional way of measuring intelligence in extinct animals was through the encephalization quotient, a ratio of brain size to body size that attempts to account for the fact that larger animals naturally need larger brains just to operate their bodies. By this measure, Tyrannosaurus rex had an encephalization quotient around 2.4, compared to about 3.1 for a German Shepherd and 7.8 for a human. This suggested moderate intelligence, somewhere above a typical reptile, but well below a mammal. But the encephalization quotient has serious problems as a metric. Brain size doesn't scale linearly with body size, and the relationship between brain mass and cognitive ability isn't straightforward, even in living animals. Some very intelligent animals have relatively small brains. Some large-brained animals show surprisingly limited cognitive abilities. Body size can evolve independently from brain size, making historical comparisons extremely difficult. And crucially, the encephalization quotient says nothing about brain structure, the organization of neural tissue that actually determines what an animal can do cognitively. More recently, researchers have tried a different approach, focusing on neuron density rather than brain size. The idea is that the number of neurons, particularly in brain regions associated with complex cognition, might be a better indicator of intelligence than gross brain mass. Birds, despite having small heads, pack their neurons very densely, which is why some birds, particularly parrots and corvids, show cognitive abilities comparable to great apes. If dinosaurs had similar neuron densities, they might have been much smarter than their brain size would suggest. In 2023, a controversial study published in the Journal of Comparative Neurology estimated neuron counts for various dinosaurs based on their brain size and assumed neuron densities similar to modern birds. The results suggested that large theropods like Tyrannosaurus might have had 2 to 3 billion neurons in their pallium, the bird equivalent of the mammalian cerebral cortex. That's a neuron count similar to a baboon. If true, it would mean these dinosaurs were capable of complex cognition, possibly even behaviors like tool use and cultural transmission of knowledge across generations. However, this study was quickly challenged by other paleontologists. A rebuttal published in 2024 pointed out multiple problems with the methodology. The assumptions about neuron density might not apply to non-avian dinosaurs. The estimates of brain size were probably too high, as dinosaur brains didn't fill their entire cranial cavity the way bird brains do. Most crucially, neuron count alone doesn't determine intelligence. Brain architecture matters enormously. The way neurons are organized, the connections between different brain regions, the presence of specialized structures. All of these affect cognitive ability in ways that can't be captured by simply counting neurons. The current consensus, based on multiple lines of evidence, is that dinosaurs were probably about as intelligent as modern reptiles, with some species showing cognitive abilities comparable to crocodilians or monitor lizards. This is not a trivial thing. Crocodilians show complex behaviors, including tool use, coordinated hunting strategies, and sophisticated social interactions. Monitor lizards can solve complex problems, learn from observation, and adapt their behavior based on experience. These are capable, intelligent animals, just not in the way that mammals or birds are intelligent. Different dinosaur groups likely had different levels of cognitive ability. The small Maniraptorans, close relatives of birds, probably had the highest intelligence. Species like Troodon and Deinonychus had relatively large brains with well-developed cerebral regions, binocular vision, grasping hands, and other features associated with complex behavior. They may have been capable of sophisticated problem-solving, social learning, and flexible behavioral responses to novel situations. The large theropods, like Tyrannosaurus, probably had moderate intelligence, enough for strategic hunting, territorial behavior, and complex social interactions, but nothing approaching primate or corvid intelligence. The herbivorous dinosaurs, particularly the Ornithischians, likely had lower intelligence, focused more on sensory processing and basic survival behaviors. But even this might be selling them short. Intelligence is notoriously difficult to define and measure, even in living animals. An animal can be intelligent in ways that don't show up in our tests, adapted for cognitive challenges that we don't think to measure. Dinosaurs lived successful lives for over 100 million years, adapting to changing environments, competing with each other and with other animals, finding food, avoiding danger, raising young. They must have had the cognitive abilities necessary for these tasks, even if we struggle to quantify exactly what those abilities were. What we can say with confidence is that dinosaurs were not the dim-witted monsters of stereotype. They had brains capable of processing sensory information, coordinating complex movements, making decisions, learning from experience. Some species were probably quite clever, capable of behaviors that would surprise us if we could observe them. Others were perhaps less cognitively sophisticated, but still competent, effective animals. The Mesozoic was not populated by robots or automatons, but by thinking, feeling creatures that navigated their world with whatever intelligence evolution had given them. One of the most persistent myths about dinosaurs, particularly the predatory theropods, is that they hunted in coordinated packs, like modern wolves or lions. This idea has been reinforced by movies and documentaries, showing raptors working together with sophisticated tactics to bring down larger prey. It's a compelling image, dramatic and exciting. But when we look at the actual evidence, the picture becomes much less clear. The idea of pack hunting in dinosaurs dates back to 1969, when paleontologist John Ostrom described Deinonychus, the terrible claw, a medium-sized theropod with an enlarged sickle-shaped claw on each foot. Several Deinonychus skeletons were found together with remains of a larger herbivore, Tenontosaurus. Ostrom suggested this was evidence of cooperative hunting, multiple Deinonychus working together to take down prey too large for any individual to handle. The idea caught on and was soon applied to other theropods. Velociraptors, famously depicted as pack hunters in Jurassic Park, were assumed to show similar behavior. But there's a problem. The evidence for pack hunting is largely circumstantial, based on multiple predators found near prey remains. And there are alternative explanations that don't require coordinated cooperation. Modern crocodilians and Komodo dragons, the closest living relatives of dinosaurs, show what's called agonistic feeding behavior. When multiple individuals arrive at a carcass, they don't cooperate. They compete, often violently, each trying to eat as much as possible before being driven away by larger individuals. Cannibalism is common. The smaller or weaker animals may even be killed and eaten by their own species. This creates exactly the kind of fossil assemblage we see with Deinonychus and Tenontosaurus, multiple predators at a kill site. But it requires no cooperation, no pack structure, no sophisticated social behavior. Studies published in recent years have examined this question more rigorously. Researchers looked at stable carbon isotopes in Deinonychus teeth, which record information about diet and can reveal whether individuals of different ages were eating the same food. If Deinonychus hunted cooperatively in family groups, you'd expect juveniles and adults to have similar isotope ratios, indicating they were sharing kills. But that's not what the data showed. Instead, the isotope ratios changed with age, suggesting that young and adult Deinonychus were eating different things, probably hunting separately. This is inconsistent with the kind of complex social structure necessary for pack hunting. Additional evidence comes from comparing dinosaur behavior to that of living archosaurs. Birds and crocodilians, the only surviving archosaur lineages, rarely hunt cooperatively. Some birds do, like Harris's hawks, but it's uncommon and doesn't involve the kind of sophisticated coordination seen in mammalian pack hunters. The vast majority of archosaurs are solitary hunters, or, at most, form loose feeding aggregations, where individuals happen to be in the same place but aren't actually cooperating. Based on phylogenetic inference, using the behavior of living relatives to infer behavior in extinct animals, the most parsimonious assumption is that non-avian dinosaurs hunted alone or in temporary, uncoordinated groups. Does this mean no dinosaurs ever showed any social behavior? Certainly not. Trackways show evidence of groups moving together, particularly in herbivorous species. Nesting colonies demonstrate that many species gathered at specific locations to breed. There's even evidence from some fossils of what might be group attacks, multiple predators converging on a single large prey animal. But convergence on a resource isn't the same as cooperative hunting. It doesn't require complex communication, leadership structure, or coordinated tactics. It just requires multiple animals being attracted to the same opportunity and being willing to tolerate each other's presence long enough to feed. The herbivorous dinosaurs, particularly the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, probably did show more complex social structures. Trackway evidence suggests they traveled in herds, with young animals protected in the center and adults on the outside. Bone beds containing hundreds or thousands of individuals, like the famous Maiasaura sites in Montana, indicate these animals gathered in enormous groups, possibly for protection or to exploit seasonal resources. Within such groups, there would have been social hierarchies, individual recognition, communication systems. But this is herd behavior, more like bison or wildebeest than wolves or lions, based on safety in numbers rather than coordinated cooperation. So what does this mean for how we should imagine dinosaur social lives? We should probably think of most theropods as solitary hunters, coming together temporarily to compete over resources, but not forming stable social groups. Some species might have shown more social behavior, perhaps traveling in small family groups or maintaining loose associations, but nothing approaching the pack structures of mammalian carnivores. The herbivores were more gregarious, forming herds that provided protection and facilitated finding resources. But even these groups were probably more like aggregations than tightly bonded social units. It's a less dramatic picture than the one popular culture has given us, but it's probably more accurate. Dinosaurs were products of their evolutionary history, archosaurs with all that implies for behavior and cognition. They weren't mammals in reptile suits. They were their own thing, with their own ways of living, their own social systems or lack thereof. Understanding this helps us see them more clearly, not as we wish they were, but as the evidence suggests they actually lived. Let's bring all of this together now. Let's try to picture what a day in the life of a dinosaur might actually have looked like, combining everything we've learned about their bodies, their behaviors, their physiology, their capabilities. Imagine a theropod, something like Deinonychus, moving through a forest in the early Cretaceous, about 115 million years ago. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the animal is already active. Its warm-blooded metabolism means it doesn't need to bask in the sun to become active, unlike the lizards and crocodilians that share its world. Its body is covered in feathers, not just for warmth, but for display, patterns of colour that would be visible to any other members of its species. The long feathers on its arms rustle slightly as it moves, and the fan of feathers on its tail drags through the ferns behind it. It pauses, head cocked, listening. The forest is full of sound, the deep booming of hadrosaurs in the distance, calling to each other across the floodplain, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth, the calls of primitive birds in the canopy above. The theropod adds its own voice, a low, resonant vocalization produced with its mouth closed, air pushed into the pouches in its throat. Not a roar, something stranger, more percussive, felt as much as heard. It's claiming territory, warning off rivals, announcing its presence to any potential mates in the area. As it walks, watch how it moves. The tail swings gently from side to side, not consciously controlled, but moving in response to the physics of balance, helping regulate angular momentum and making each step more efficient. The body is held horizontal, weight perfectly balanced at the hips. The head remains remarkably stable despite the body's movement, eyes focused, tracking movement in the shadows. This is an active, alert predator, neither sluggish nor clumsy, moving with precision through its territory. It hunts alone, though it will tolerate others of its species when food is plentiful. There's no pack, no coordinated strategy, just individual predators, each looking for opportunities. But it's not stupid. It's learning from experience, remembering where prey tends to be found, adjusting its behavior based on success and failure. When it finds prey, its response is fast and strategic, using its sickle claws not in leaping attacks, like in the movies, but in precise strikes while grounded, pinning prey with its weight and claws, while killing with its jaws. After a successful hunt, it feeds quickly, aware that larger predators might be attracted by the smell of blood. And indeed, within an hour, a larger theropod arrives, something twice its size. The Deinonychus doesn't fight. It yields, moving away to find other opportunities. This is pragmatism, not cowardice. Living to hunt another day is more important than defending a kill. In the afternoon, as the day warms, the theropod seeks shade. Even with a warm-blooded metabolism, there are limits to temperature regulation, and the Cretaceous can be hot. It rests in the shadow of a large cycad, panting slightly to cool itself, tongue visible inside its open mouth. This is a brief respite before the activity of evening hunting. As the sun sets, painting the sky in colours that would look familiar to any human, the theropod returns to its usual roosting spot, a small clearing on a slight rise where it can see potential threats approaching. Here it will spend the night, not sleeping deeply, but dozing, alert enough to respond to danger. Its feathers provide insulation against the cool night air. Its warm-blooded metabolism means it doesn't need to become torpid when the temperature drops. This is how dinosaurs lived. Not as monsters, not as rubber suits in movies, but as real animals with real behaviors, adapted to their world through millions of years of evolution. Some were as fierce as any predator alive today. Some were gentle giants, processing vast quantities of plant matter to fuel their enormous bodies. Some cared tenderly for their young, protecting them, feeding them, teaching them how to survive. Some sang strange songs to attract mates, their voices echoing across ancient landscapes. Some moved with grace that would astonish us if we could see it, their bodies perfectly coordinated, every movement efficient and purposeful. They were neither cold-blooded reptilian monsters nor warm-blooded proto-mammals. They were dinosaurs, a unique group of animals that dominated the Earth for over 160 million years. They evolved, adapted, diversified, creating an incredible variety of forms and lifestyles. They witnessed the breakup of Pangaea, the opening of the Atlantic Ocean, the rise and fall of sea levels, dramatic climate changes. They survived multiple extinction events, and for the vast majority of their existence, they were successful, filling ecosystems from pole to pole, from sea level to mountains, from deserts to rainforests. The dinosaurs we've explored tonight were not the simplified creatures of Victorian imagination or Hollywood spectacle. They were complex animals with sophisticated behaviors, varied physiologies, diverse social structures. They had features and abilities that still surprise us with each new fossil discovery. Every bone, every footprint, every preserved feather adds another detail to the picture, brings us closer to understanding what these animals were truly like. And in a very real sense, dinosaurs never went extinct. Every morning when you hear birds singing, you're hearing dinosaurs singing. When you watch a bird building a nest, sitting on eggs, feeding chicks, you're watching dinosaur behavior that evolved long before there were any mammals larger than rats. The theropods, those feathered predators we've been imagining, survived the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous. They survived because they were small enough, adaptable enough, lucky enough, and they radiated into the incredible diversity of birds we see today. Over 10,000 species, living on every continent, filling every imaginable niche. So, when you look at a robin or an eagle or a hummingbird, you're looking at a dinosaur, the only dinosaur lineage that made it through to the present day. And in their eyes, in their behavior, in their biology, you can see echoes of that ancient world, glimpses of what all dinosaurs might have been like when they ruled the Earth. The mystery isn't completely solved. There's still so much we don't know, but every year brings new discoveries, new techniques, new ways of seeing into the past, and the picture that emerges is richer, stranger, more wonderful than anything we could have imagined. These were real animals, and we're finally beginning to understand what they were really like. If you've enjoyed this journey through the world of dinosaurs, if these glimpses into the Mesozoic have sparked your curiosity or helped you wind down for the night, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Bedtime Biology. Share your thoughts in the comments. What aspect of dinosaur life fascinates you most? What would you like to explore in future episodes? Your feedback helps shape the content we create. Until next time, sleep well and keep wondering about the natural world.